Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. And as always, we're brought to you by Mount Up Fitness, an all-inclusive application that has programmed workouts for all levels of backcountry fitness. No gear, no problem. Use the minimum gear daily program to get 30 minutes of a tough workout whenever and wherever is convenient for you. Use the code OKS30, all caps, to get a free 30-day trial. Now, my guest today is a coyote trapper from the great state of Ohio. She is an active member of the Ohio Trappers Association, a trapping education instructor, a frequent demo giver at state and national rendezvous, and an exceptionally kind person. Beyond her trapping prowess, she is a screen printer, an author, a graphic designer, which all dovetailed into her launching a new trapping-specific apparel brand, Tight Chains Co., which she runs with the support of her husband and children. Lydia Reichenbacher, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been really excited to chat with you for some time. And where I usually like to start is asking about what your earliest memory of being exposed to trapping was.
So I didn't grow up being a trapper when I was young. None of my family really did it. The first exposure I had was trapping some groundhogs with live traps. I had a chicken egg business at the time, and I would just kind of get the animals around the barn. And then one day I was right at 14, and I found a long spring in the barn, just like this rusty old thing, and I was so intrigued by it. I already knew kind of like the background of wildlife management at that time, but what really captivated me first was the mechanics of the trap and how it worked. And I was so excited. I asked my dad, "Hey, like, what is this? Show me it." And he started talking about, "Oh, there's a dog and an ear and all these things." And I was just like, "Whoa, tell me more."
So, did your dad have trapping experience and you just weren't exposed to it? Or did he just have kind of like a broad understanding of just the mechanics of how a trap worked?
Yeah, he had a handful of traps. In his high school days, he trapped for just around the house for a couple raccoons around the farm. So he was familiar with what traps were at the time.
So then you get that long spring, you kind of figure out how it operates. How do you bridge the gap from going, just trapping a few moles and stuff that might be bothering chickens to having a long spring to then getting into trapping? Was it picking up a book? Was it talking to somebody locally that was a trapper? How did you bridge that gap of figuring out what to do next?
Um, it's kind of just self-run. Like I just kind of saw it and I asked my dad, "Hey, can we go set this? Can you show me how?" He said, "I haven't trapped for years, but I mean, we got one little creek, we could go set it." I caught a muskrat. But then after that, I just really grew myself with my interest. So I used to walk my own line. That year, I got traps and I worked up some money and I set and I would carry, buckets in one hand, buckets in another hand, and I'd walk about a mile one way just to set traps. And the funny part is, I'd often skip my math class to go run the traps. Uh, and then from there, it's just, I don't know, it's like my greatest passion. After I started trapping, hadn't have my own line, I kind of morphed from that to running a coyote line, just over the years and yeah.
So I'm interested because, when I started trapping, which was later in life, you were around 14, 15 years old. I had the fortunate access to YouTube, right? Where there's been a lot more content put out. It sounds like you might not have had, you know, tons of YouTube channels. So when you were starting out on kind of that 1 mile long trap line, it sounds like it was water trapping mostly. What were some of the biggest mistakes you made? And like, how did you like make a mistake, recognize it, and then adjust?
Well, I would say more so my learning curve was with coyotes.
Mm.
So I started setting for all species and any species at the time, and I would catch the typical Ohio species of raccoons and possums, maybe a skunk or two, um, a red fox. And then one day I'm walking along my line and I'm walking the same path I normally walk, and there's coyote tracks right in front of me. I'm like, wait a minute, what are those? Like, I'm gonna follow these. I want to trap that. That is the top predator in Ohio. If you trap those for a beginner, that's a lot of skill. And so suddenly my whole priorities shifted and I was after that coyote. It was like a challenge. And that became the battle of wits between the coyote and me because at the time I didn't know it, but the location I had, our farm, was just a random pass through hunting location for
Mm.
coyotes. It wasn't their standard route. So it wasn't a pinch point, like you can predict when they'll come through. We had one coyote come through like clockwork every 14 days, one track going through. And I said, there's a coyote. I have to catch it. That one. That's the one I have to catch. So I would set a trap over here, and then the traps would go this way when he would come through. I'm like, oh man. So I set a trap over here, and then he'd come this way and go through. Like, how am I going to do this? How does people even how do they trap? And I was after it, and everything, like every baby step happened, like how to bed a trap. I got that down. Okay, it dug it out one time. Oh my gosh. Okay, I got that. Let's do something else. Then I learned something else. And then finally, the last day of season, I went out the backyard and about 150 yards from our house is where I set a trap. And it was the very last day of season. I wasn't expecting it. And there was the coyote that I had caught finally.
How long was that from, initially seeing those tracks, getting that interest, trying everything in the book and getting ultimately, outwitted by this coyote for, was it months? I mean, the whole season? Like, what did that look like?
About 2.5 months, maybe three and a half months.
And how did it feel when you looked out and saw and walked to that coyote, ultimately dispatch it? But like, what were some of the feelings that you had, succeeding for that first time, largely on your own wits?
It was a crazy experience. I mean, it's one thing to just work with some dirt and set a trap, work with the mechanics of the trap, kind of what got me first interested. It's one thing to walk your line and see all the sticks and all the things in the woods, but then when you're not expecting to have a live animal right there, it kind of takes you back. It's like, "Oh, wow, look at that." And I squatted down and studied it and I watched it and it would watch me, and that was just the moment where it's like those eyes were just piercing, and I knew that something was going on and I want to figure them out. I want to learn about coyote biology and behavior and become a awesome coyote trapper.
And you've done that, which is amazing. And how was the wait from that coyote where you caught it on the last day of season until the beginning of the next season? Like, what did that, you were learning on your own out in the field. You finally catch this coyote on the last day. This has cemented your love of trap, not just trapping, but coyote trapping specifically. Like, did you start to go to like your local, or not local, but your state association and go to demos? Like, what did your education look like after that initial catch?
It's funny you asked that because after I finally was involved and captivated by trapping, I still couldn't drive yet. And I begged my dad to go to the Ohio State Trappers Association convention for the year. And we sat through hours of demos. And if you ask my dad to this day, he'll say, oh man, my back was so sore, but we sat through all the demos because Lydia wanted to learn and she had perseverance, and it's just awesome. I'm so thankful that my dad took the time to really invest what he could at the time.
And if you think back to those demos, because I know I'm an adult onset trapper. I didn't start until my 30s. A lot of folks listening to the show are either you know, we have the whole gamut, right? From people who've been trapping their whole lives to people who are thinking about trapping and people like myself who started later. But when you had kind of a formal education now, like you went to the convention, you were watching, professionals do this, was there a big gap between what you had done to get success with that first coyote and what they were teaching? Or was it, a smaller gap than maybe you had imagined?
Um, I would say I I learned a lot at the demos and at the convention. Some of the stuff was kind of the same when I sat down and watched them all consecutively at once, because the fundamentals of trapping it's very similar. Everyone can do it with their own style or different way, but it's generally kind of similar. Um, but I don't remember where I was going with that.
No, it's all good. I mean, like, it's interesting to me because I've been now to a lot of demos like you. I know you do a lot of demos, and like you said, I think core fundamentals remain the same, right? And that even kind of goes across species, like understanding patterning, understanding habitat, setting traps. So when you think about new trappers getting involved, you learned on your own and then went and got education. If you had to give someone a piece of advice, like they say, hey, I listened to Lydia, I'm really interested in trapping a coyote, where would you tell them to start?
Get a wide variety of opinions
Hmm.
from people in various regions and come up with a system that works for you, and actually take that idea and go out into your yard, into the field, and actually dig it out, practice, because some people they have things that work for them that might not work for you,
Hmm.
or there's the dirt is different, or the weather is different. We don't get a whole lot of snow, but we also like it's Ohio, so we get a lot of random weather. But some of the sets are just dependent on like how you actually have your hand placement. And there's actually a big gap, I do think, with learning curves of if you don't get it, then it's hard. You think coyote trapping is how do people do this? Like have a specific line dedicated for coyotes. I'm catching critters and some coyotes, but I don't understand. And once you figure it out and you have the idea of like how they think, how to do it, man, it's so easy. I like tell people coyote trapping, once you get it, it's like it's so easy and it's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting for that day because coyotes and wolves. That's the most difficult thing that I've been trapping. I still haven't figured out the right mix. But I hear that too, which is great, and I think that's a pretty good piece of advice. Of like, you can be varied, of course, and obviously you're going to have different catches at some points, but like focusing on an animal in your area and dedicating a line to that can really probably beat down that learning curve. Um, so when you were 14, 15, you've gone to the convention. What did your next few seasons look like? Did you start, quote, stacking fur? Or was it, a slow, gradual increase? And how much time were you spending? Was this very part time? Or were you dedicating pretty much the whole winter to trapping?
Well, I will say from the moment I started, kind of the perseverance that I had after that first coyote kind of set the stage for the rest of my
Mm.
trapping career. Because I knew that if I wanted to do this, it took perseverance, patience, and practice. Those are the three P's I say. So looking back when I first started when I was 14, every year since then, I had grew my what how much fur I got. My catch rate. I grew my catch rate steadily every single year, not by a ton, but for what I could do at that stage of life. When I was 18, I injured my shoulder, and that's been a huge part of my trap line and my growing up, like middle years. And yeah, that changed a lot of the trap line. But even still, like trapping has been something that I'm passionate about and I love, and it's always been something that I go out and make it a point to do. It's kind of like in a zone where you're just like out there, you're in the wilderness and everything's just clear and you can think. And then when I injured my shoulder and stuff, it was hard. I set traps with my knees because my arm was literally in a sling for many years. That's a entire story,
Yeah,
but
and
I did increase my catch rate.
I want to talk about the injuries, and I got a question around that a little later because I carry some injuries too. Um, when you were increasing this catch rate year over year, you mentioned like when you found that first long spring, it was exciting, to see it. What kept the motivation up? Was it the catching? Like, what were you doing with the fur? Were you just selling it? Were you doing anything kind of creatively with the fur? Like, what was the thing that really captured you, that brought you out to do those hard things, even through injury, season after season?
Yeah, well, I would say the thing that kept getting me to come back was just the mystery of coyotes and understanding the behavior and biology, but also like the final product. I love the fur, and with that first coyote, this area, my dad actually helped me in, and we tanned it ourselves in the garage, and I still have that fur to this day. But kind of the momentum, I would say, is um, just because it was an outlet for me and it was a thing that I can go and do, and it was all my own. Like my dad, he got to come a couple times when he was off work, or I think I've had maybe 5 people total out, but um, yeah, just getting out there.
And you talk about thinking clearly, and I fully agree with you. I always say, trapping's like a time machine. It's the one time thing that you can just go back in time. If you turn your cell phone off, you really are stepping back into the 1800s. It's just you, the animal you're after, or set of animals you're after. How did that dedicated time to have clear thinking help advance your professional career? Because I know you've done a lot of other things like screen printing, graphic design, writing. What did that like alone time mean to you every season? Like, did that help advance your professional career as well?
Um, I would say the skills of that I have learned on the trap line has definitely shadowed or mirrored itself in other areas, whether it's sheep shearing or screen printing or writing. I can like tell you, okay, this reminds me of trapping because this, or like sheep shearing is very similar because you have to, do the motions, but everyone is slightly different and each sheep is different, just like each animal is different. And it's just, I see a lot of fundamentals from trapping, but my quote alone time, not really, because I got married at 19 and was pregnant at 20 and had a baby by like right when I turned on my 21st, 2 weeks after my 21st birthday. And then from that moment, it was okay, I'm not by myself anymore. And but I do need to get out of the house. So there I am with a 3 week old. I'm like, all right, bye. I'm going. Like, you're at work. I'm need to get out of the house and I'm gonna go trapping. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, and that was a question I had. I have 3 young kids. I actually have a 3-week-old right now. That's why I have bags under my eyes. And I take my kids on the trap line. But you mentioned like at the beginning, right? You started off by carrying buckets for a mile. This was pre-shoulder injury. We'll talk about the shoulder injury in a minute, but how did having a child really change your approach to trapping?
Well, at first with a newborn, it was November in Iowa, so it's pretty cold. And I had previously would park at a place and I'd walk. I'd go up a hill or go up a creek line or something, trying to get an intersection with coyotes. You like to find like a pinch point, like a bridge or something. So I'd ultimately walk to one of those crop changes, and with the newborn, like I'm not going to do that. So then I had a whole different perspective shift to where can I trap that I can drive my truck to and I can check it from the truck or see it from the truck where I don't have to walk. That correlates back with my shoulder too. I couldn't walk very far because my shoulder was dislocated too much and would wiggle. And but with the newborn especially. And then from that, just in toddlerhood, man, you have to slow down. She would be playing in the dirt, drawing pictures on the 2 track, and I'd be over there setting a trap, and it was fun. She asked me all the time, like, "Oh, mom, do you have a coyote today?" She used to call them uh yogis.
That's adorable. Yeah, I mean, I empathize because it does force you to slow down. It can force you to adapt in a way where some people might look down on it, like, oh, you got to get out there and walk around. I don't see it that way. Like, you have to adapt to whatever circumstances you're in. Some people, can't walk very far, or you might have a child with you that you would need to be able to get back to a truck or a vehicle, whether it's to change a diaper or, they get too cold or, it is an amazing thing to go through. And I think, as a trapper, it really makes you appreciate the time you do have by yourself to go out there and really just hammer
Mhm.
down and do what you want to do. But it's doable. And I think that's the message I like to get across to people. Like, whether you have an injury, whether you're trying to lose weight and you can't walk very far, whether you have a kid with you, like, you can still get out and manage within the bounds that you have and still have a good time. Um, with your daughter, were there any moments specifically where you had to do like your Zen moment and be like, I know the situation I'm in? Like, was there any like crying or anything that you had to overcome in those first moments getting your daughter or son, sorry,
This daughter, yeah.
daughter, used to being out on the trap line with mom?
Um, I mean, not really. I practiced diaper changing in the front seat a lot, and I actually made some sets with the dirty diaper. Um, and I would kind of learn the tricks to it. So like backpacking, after she got a little bit older, my shoulder was like better at that point, so I could backpack her. And singing Down by the Bay about 18 times the same verse. So and now she's 4 years old and she'll actually like she we had a hole in the yard that my dog had dug and she was like, "Mama, look, the dirt and here's like where I put the sticks." And it was so cute. She likes it too.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see them pick up just the little things, right? Of they get they draw on the excitement that you have as a parent. And I think that's pretty dang cool. Um, going back to your injury, and this is one thing I want to talk about because I've talked about this with other folks like Randy Newberg. He was on the show and he's got a shoulder injury and he's trying to rehab it and he still gets out and traps. So, you know, similar to me, I come from a combat sports background. I just carry all sorts of injuries and you have to kind of adapt. What happened to your shoulder and what was like the immediate, things you had to change in your trap line approach to kind of work around that injury?
Yeah, so it was 2 weeks before my high school graduation. I was 18 years old, out shooting compound bow in the yard, and I would do it every day, not out of the ordinary, but I shot a little bit more than I normally would, but still fine, right? And then I felt like something hurt, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So I pushed it off and spent the rest of the day building fence and throwing some hay, living on a farm. And by the time I sat down at night, it was just so swollen. It
Hmm.
had pushed and dislocated my shoulder out and it sent my body into shock. So I had to go to the ER. And of course, they said, "Nothing's broken, go home." And that kind of set for the next 3.5 years this excruciating pain and problem to try and figure out. I'd moved to Iowa. I saw doctors in Iowa, doctors in Ohio. I had teams of doctors at some of the top universities, top hospitals, all looking at me. Nobody could figure me out. After my injury, my first trapping season after that, um, I remember picking up a brick because sometimes out in Iowa we would use a brick for steak when you're water trapping. Um, and I picked up a brick and I just held my shoulder wrong and it dislocated like right at my clavicle bone where my sternum connects. And I was out for like 2 weeks. I couldn't pick up a glass of water. I couldn't write with a pen. And there I am, a journalist in college. And then ever since then, 3.5 years later, skipping over having a daughter and still working on everything at home. Finally, back in Ohio, a doctor said, "Hey, I think I know what's wrong with you." 3.5 later, I still have such a hard problem. I'm like, "Okay, what?" He said, "Well, I think it looks like your pec minor was torn,"
Oh,
which no woman has ever been recorded to have in history or literature, to his knowledge. And I looked at him and said, "Well, I do manly things."
I mean,
And
I would say that's awesome, but that's not awesome. It's very unique. At least you get to be number one. Probably not one that you'd ever really wanted to be number one at. But what was the result then? Because that's not an insignificant tear, and you carried it around for what, 3 years before that was identified?
yeah, over 3 years. But because it was so chronic at that point, other problems had come up, like scar tissue and frozen shoulder. So I've had three surgeries from there, including a really extensive clavicle reconstruction where they basically drill a hole, take a piece of hamstring and tie it together because it was so overstretched. It was floating and it would dislocate 4 times a day, and I'd have to push it back in and pop it, and it would come out like 2 inches high. And over at my AC joint, my bone was hitting my other bone, making a bruise on it. So they had to cut off a 1/4 inch and take it out.
That sounds horrible. I'm glad. I mean, has it been better now after all of the surgeries? Like, is it a noticeable, like, almost back to what it was prior to that compound bow pec tear?
It's livable.
Livable. So it's never going to be 100%, but it's better than it was.
Right.
So when you were having all those issues, though, it was still a mystery. You were still running your line. So, like, if you couldn't set your traps by hand, I mean, were you using like trap setters, your knees? Were you throwing traps at trees? Like, how are you getting by?
Yeah, so I set traps with my knees, and you can still do that with your arm in a sling, by the way. You can do them one-handed. Um, every trap setter that's out there, it needs two hands. Even though it claimed one-handed trap setter, it's not truly one-handed. You need at least some sort of holder or something. And I know there's probably some other adaptions I could make, but it's just so much easier to have your knees and you just pop down and do it, and you don't have to carry anything extra. So that's how I've done it. And I at that time I limited myself to only trapping where if I needed help, I could have somebody come like pound in my steaks. So I would convince my husband to come and pound in the steaks for me when I first set and then go back the next day and set the traps and fill the beds.
That's awesome. It's good you have that support too, that you can just be like, come on, hubby, like, come out here and drive these steaks for me, and then go and do all your work the next day. That's a pretty good teamwork approach too. Now, you know, I was recently, asked to do a demo at an event coming up, and I have to admit, I was absolutely and still am kind of awash with imposter syndrome. I know you do demos. When was the first time you were asked to do a demo? And then did you have imposter syndrome? How did you kind of tackle that? Like, in your 20s, a woman, like, how did you kind of overcome all of that?
Well, if I'm honest, I'm still working on it because as someone who doesn't want to come across as bragging, it's really hard for me to share accomplishments when I'm like, I don't feel like I should get all the credit because, like everyone, we're all learning. And I think in the trapping industry, especially, you'll hear some of the top guys who's been trapping for 40 years or however long, and they'll still say, I'm still learning. I still got something to learn. I learn from every single demo I get. I get one little piece of information and it's worth going to a demo because I get one nugget of information. But it definitely takes a lot of getting used to for public speaking and for just kind of filtering down what you want to talk about and what's important. I kind of always want to think about some of my approach is different than what you'd see at a typical demo. My first demo ever was at a small region meet, like a spring region meet, and I ended up printing out maps and put them on a poster board because I wanted to talk about the importance of coyote location and where to find like the crop changes on aerial photographs. And do I see other people talking about that? Not really. Was it super influential once I learned it myself and it opened up doors? Yes.
That's awesome. And with being a demo instructor, you know, I haven't done it yet. You've done it several times now. You know, people probably don't realize that the person giving the demo probably learns stuff too. Like, what has been your biggest learning from giving demos?
Um, don't ever try to be fake or try to make yourself sound good. I never want to do want to do that, but if you're authentic, people can see that. I'm passionate about trapping. I can talk your ear off. If I see someone in the grocery store or at an auction or anything with a trapper shirt on, I am up there. I'm talking to them. I'll stick out my hand, say, "Hi, I'm Lydia." They'll look at me. I'm like, "Sorry, I saw your shirt. I'm a trapper too." Like, and we talk through it, but for something who is like in a different part where there's no trappers, I'm not as bold as that. But thinking about that, when you're giving a demo, you're not giving it to everyone. You're giving it to one person.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And talking about shirts, and for people who are audio only and not watching the video, you have a really cool shirt on. Yep. And you know, you've been in the like apparel space, screen printing for a long time. Like, you now have a new company, Tight Chains. Like, what got you interested? Like, is it just kind of the merging of passions at this point, and starting to build apparel for trappers, women, men, kids, whomever? So tell us a little bit more about that. Maybe the origin of Tight Chains. I think every trapper listening will know where that saying comes from, but for people who might not be trappers, where it all originates from.
Yeah, so actually it's a little bit different than you might think. So I actually got into screen printing because I wanted a trapping shirt.
Oh.
And my dad and I were like, there's no shirt that has, this, or let's make a funny shirt for our friend that says this because it's an inside joke. And we were making our own press and figuring out how to make the systems work in our garage. And then I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I started telling my friends about it. They said, oh, if you're making shirts, I want shirts too. And then I suddenly realized, oh, why keep it to myself when I can share it with others? So then I invested in screen printing equipment, like a full setup, and started learning a whole new skill and not just talking about it, but actually doing it. And then that kind of morphed into the option to do both the retail side, Tight Chains Co., and then also wholesale side for other businesses and people who might want shirts from a wholesale level.
Awesome. And how recent is this? My understanding is it's very recent. Are these available now for people listening who, you know, might want to buy and show off, their love and passion for trapping so that the Lydias of the world can stop you in the grocery store and talk your ear
Right.
off about trapping?
Yeah, so Tight Chains Co. just launched their first design. It's for pre-order only. That's open now. After it's closed, you can still find our apparel on our website. when we have pre-orders available, we'll also be at the NTA show in July this year in South Dakota, and the Pennsylvania rendezvous coming up at the end of June, and then the Ohio State Convention in September. And then I'll have more apparel online starting the fall time, perfect for trapping and Christmas. But Tight Chains Co. Circling back to you asked me why the name Tight Chains Co. So in the trapping community, that's a saying, the tight chains, and it's just like saying good luck to someone or wishing them success on their line. And that kind of just correlates with my whole goal is to just encourage outdoorsmen and women and to keep going and to not give up. That's part of my story, and I want other people to know that too. Whether that's not giving up in the field when you're out having difficulties, having success, or whether that's not giving up defending our rights to trap.
That's a beautiful segue. I know you and I mean, anybody who is in any vein of social media around trapping sees two sides of a coin. One is where, like, exactly what you're doing. I think so many trappers are passionate. We want to show our support publicly. I'll be buying shirts from you wearing it, where I hope people stop me and ask me so I can, essentially evangelize the benefits, right? From the conservation standpoint, from, the historic standpoint, and maybe, conversion's probably not the right word, but at least help people understand the why, and that we're not brutes out there just doing something for, some sociopathic reason, right? There's logic
Exactly.
behind it. So how do you see trapping advancing, right? I see two veins, like oftentimes we're in the same boat shooting at each other, other trappers, not being very open to new ideas. Like, I love what you're doing with the apparel, and I think that goes a long way, but how does that balance out with social media? And, like, how do you see the future of trapping progressing as we go into this 21st century world where social media is a part of it, where we are going to be more public facing?
Yeah, well, it's like you said, having a conversation. So I think the vast majority of the population today doesn't understand what conservation truly means. And it's kind of a hard topic if you didn't grow up with it, especially if a lot of people don't really know where their meat comes from or what it means to have a healthy population of animals, or just how people in general have been taking away habitat for wildlife and then expecting them to not be touched, or not to be phased with the habitat differences and resources. So back with Tight Chains Co., I think you're right with the goal is for Tight Chains Co. to be an opportunity to support and represent trapping in a positive light. But not only that, but also to inspire a conversation. So anybody can look at your shirt and say, "Oh, hey, that's cool, but what does it mean?" And that's the moment right there, the "what does it mean" moment that we're looking for, that would open a door to a conversation that might otherwise not have happened. And I think those two things combined is going to make well, it has an opportunity to make a really big impact in the trapping industry as a whole.
I have high hopes for that. I think, there are missed opportunities because, I usually don't wear branded shirts out, but if I do, I hope it does spur something. And there's still an element, though, where I think all trappers, like if they purchase a shirt, whether it's yours or another trapping company, where we all have to have a little bit of the onus on us as trappers to also educate ourselves in a way to be articulate in the way we do describe trapping. So, if someone wears the shirt, someone starts
Yes.
the conversation, it's like we need to have talking points built around, putting trapping in a positive light. Do you have any suggestions for people listening on where to find content like that, just to educate themselves on, like, how to have a productive conversation with someone who, say, might be staunchly anti-trapping or, anti-hunting, whatever the case may be, to where you don't just devolve into like a combative situation, but you can, give your points hopefully, walk away with them having a little bit more education.
Yeah, I always encourage people to use the words wildlife management because that encompasses a lot, and that's really what trappers do. As far as finding more resources, the National Trappers Association is always a good resource. The best management practices is a good resource.
I want to do like a little bit of lightning round questions for you. There's going to be three in a row. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made on your trap line?
Not setting enough traps, only setting one trap. That was a big lesson I learned from the first coyote all the way to even now. This prime example is I would drive down this two-track lane back to an oil pump, and every year I would set there, and then I realized that before I got to the oil pump there was this little crossing that I missed, and that year the crops were rotated and they were different, so there was big corn in the oil pump and there was nice beans in the other spot crossover. And then I was like, oh no, I need to set over here. And I didn't just set one trap, I set three, and if I didn't set three, I wouldn't have gotten my first triple coyotes all in a line within 8 feet of each other. And one was silver, one was red, and one was extra long, fluffy fur. And it was such a cool experience.
That's awesome. Second question. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made in your fur shed?
I don't I don't really know. Um Not getting a vertical fleshing beam sooner, because of my shoulder injury, it's so hard. I can't flesh
Mhm.
critters. Even now, it's very difficult. And when I was exposed to a vertical fleshing beam, you almost use gravity and kind of go in this sideways motion. And now I can flesh. I'm still not good at it because I haven't fleshed for years. I just haven't done that skill, that part of trapping. But yeah, getting a vertical fleshing beam and using other methods that work for you. So, for example, pounding in the steaks. I used to have my husband come along or schedule a time with someone. Hey, can you come help me? Or just muscle through it and then be dead for the next day. And now I use a grounding rod, which
Mm.
is essentially like a big sliding hammer. And the end of it, we like cut off so then it fits in the steak driver, or sorry, the super steak. And so I can use that and keep my elbows in and pound in the steak super fast.
That's awesome. Yeah, just constantly adapting, I think, is kind of the name of the game. With the vertical fleshing beam, is there a certain brand or did you have to build it yourself?
Yeah, my friend showed me, and it's just like a PVC pipe that's like cut in half, basically on a stick.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I'd love for you to send me a picture and maybe I can post it with the episode because I personally haven't seen a vertical fleshing beam. I can understand where gravity would really play a great part. And I'm sure other people who might have shoulder injuries or other injuries that would prevent them from kind of fleshing at that normal, like 45-degree angle would really enjoy seeing what you're working with. And then my last lightning round question, and this is one you kind of seeded with me beforehand, but what's the best trap line tip you've ever received? And then does it have anything to do with toothpaste?
Yes, toothpaste is my secret weapon now. So, you ever are at a trap line, you're on your trap line and you get some lure on your hands or you're handling the bottles and maybe it just kind of comes off on your, it comes through your gloves, comes on your hands, whatever, and you can't get that smell off. You try everything, toothpaste
Wow.
takes it off completely without fail every time. I buy just the cheap toothpaste, wash your hands with it, comes off clean.
That's awesome. Do you have to watch your baby in it too? Your 4-year-old when they kind of get in it? Too cool. Well,
No.
yeah, I'll be using that one because my wife and my kids, now that they're older, they complain when I come in from the fur shed or from the line and I'm smelling like all sorts of different mashed up critters. Um,
Yeah. The other thing I would say would be to make your sets look natural. So I get people asking me all the time about why I haven't caught a coyote. I set and I say, okay, let me see a picture. And they show me this cookie cutter dirt where it's bare dirt and then it's grass or it's weeds all the way around and it's bare. And I said, well, if I was a coyote, I wouldn't want to step on that. Take it and dig it out, spread out the trap pattern and blend it in. Maybe use like 2 to 3. Well, you don't really have to, but when you're starting out, it's good to keep in mind using 2 to 3 forms of cover, maybe little grass or little dirt and some leaves broken up, and just blend that harsh line out. And that makes a huge difference.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with that 100% because that's not something that I did. I would often do the, hey, there's a bare spot here, and not putting myself in the mental space of, in my case, these were mostly foxes, um, who wouldn't want to step on that bare spot. So yeah, I agree with the covering there. You know, as you think about new trappers, it's an interesting dichotomy right now because trapping's always on the chopping block. We have to fight for our rights. But I also think there is a wave of people who are now becoming more interested, especially if you think about people doing a little bit more of the urban farming. You know, they get chickens and all of a sudden the fox gets in the hen house and people are like, well, how do you handle it? And it's coming back to trapping. So for people who are on the fence, what's the one piece of advice Lydia would give to somebody who's interested in trapping and doesn't really know where to start?
Yeah, I would say get your hands on a trap. Go to your local outdoors sportsman store, order some online, look at a local trap supply dealer, and actually find a trap and get one for whatever species you're looking at. Don't go out of your realm of ability if you're small. Don't go straight for the 330 or something, but get a trap and actually set it yourself. Take it and dig a hole and just feel what it feels like. And you wouldn't imagine how much that helps someone to boost their confidence and boost their success when you give them a trap and say, "Here, you can do it. I know you can do it." And they're like, "Are you sure?" "Yeah, let's get down and do it together." That's the highlight of their day and they'll remember that moment.
Yeah, I think that's so true because even when I started trapping, I had like just some little traps, just little footholds that I had bought at a local supply house. I was afraid of them. I'm not a small guy, but you know, there's some element of boogeymanness to trapping if you've never been exposed to it. You think of these things as, right or wrong, something that can hold a big animal, but they're very ethical. They're very non, like, you can put your hand in a trap and you're going to be okay. You're not going to be breaking fingers. But to your point, getting down with somebody and saying, like, these are not what you probably think they are. You're able to set these. Here's what happens if you step on one. Like, just demystifying the fear that a lot of people probably hold around it is absolutely great advice. So, other trappers out there
And
listening, you should definitely take and heed that and bring your friends along.
yeah. Also, just keep trying, keep doing it. Perseverance, man. I mean, everyone, once you start getting into trapping, there's so many rules, quote, right? Where people say, like, oh, do this, don't do this. I can't believe you did it that way. And this other guy says, well, I do it exactly that way. And just find what works for you. And there's not a quote wrong way. Just get out there and do it and learn.
Love it. What do you see as the future of trapping?
Um, I still see it as something that's really beneficial. We really need it, especially with, like I said, the increase in populations of humans taking away the wildlife habitat. As far as skills of the ordinary population, um, I definitely think it's picking up. There's a lot of women in trapping. There's a lot of hobbyists, like you said, the farmers, little small farmer people getting into trapping. There's definitely a need for it. There will always be a need for it, and it's our responsibility now to take that on to help manage the population because we have come and they can't manage themselves anymore. And so that's really our ultimate goal is just the health of the animals.
I love it. And so as we kind of start to wrap up, I have really two questions left. One, I have to talk about it because it's part of my passion too, which is writing. I know you went to college for journalism. You write. Do you do any kind of outdoor writing, maybe outside of like your own personal journals? Do you write articles, books, anything else that people might in the future be able to find more about you and your writing?
It kind of goes through waves of seasons for me. So right now I'm kind of in a season of launching, the screen printing, but also starting to ramp up my writing. I've done quite a lot through the years, whether that's with the Ohio State Trappers Association, their magazine that you get with their subscription, the Buckeye Trapper, or just little things here and there. I was the editor of the newspaper in Iowa. That wasn't really outdoors related, but I did try to incorporate it in when it was respectable. Um, and I am writing a book, but it'll probably be a while before that comes out, a children's book. But I'm super excited for that. And just yeah, I'm about to just write some more and get some more exposure and just encourage people. That's kind of like at the heart of everything I do. Perseverance and courage. It's just get out there and do it. It's fun. Don't forget that it's a passion and just take a breath and notice the details. And that's what I want to communicate to people.
Beautiful. Well, talking about encouragement, we'll do another podcast when your kids' book comes out. I'm excited for it. I know we have talked about that in the past, just one on one. So you can expect encouragement from me to you over the next several months and years to get that out there, so I can benefit and my kids can benefit from it. But that's truly amazing. I look forward to seeing more and more of that writing. Now, my last question, I always end on a hypothetical. Would you rather, essentially. So, Lydia, would you rather live in a world where there is no trapping allowed, but you can eat all of the store bought meat you want? Or live in a world where you can trap, but you can't eat any meat at all? Essentially, you have to become a vegetarian trapper.
Ah, um, I mean that's a tough one, but I would probably say be a vegetarian because I can get my protein in other areas. And trapping to me is really important and it's a big passion point, whether that's for the animals themselves or just for me and my story. And I don't want to see that being given up. So if it means I have to eat some more lettuce and go that route, then I will because you got to do what you got to do.
Understandable. That was a tough one. I was sitting there trying to think about what I would do too, and I don't have a good answer yet. But Lydia, first and foremost, thank you. You've been very kind to me every time we've had an interaction. I very much appreciate that. I love seeing what you're doing. Can you let people know where they can find out about, obviously, Tight Chains, where they can maybe see you at upcoming demos and shows, and anything else you'd want to put out for people to kind of get more involved with what you've got going on?
Yeah, follow us at Tight Chains Co. on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And our website is tightchainsco.com. You can check us out there and order our pre-order shirts. We'll also have our booths at the NTA this year in South Dakota, the Pennsylvania State, and the Ohio State. And I'll actually be doing demos also on the main stage at the Nationals and Pennsylvania stage as well.
And those are all Coyote demos, presumably?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope I can be there, and I will be sitting there with my little pen pad trying to pick up some things from you. But Lydia, again, thank you so much. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on the next episode.